Windows, key files, and locations. This is another informational table that calls out a bunch of really important files that you may interact with on a machine throughout a red team assessment. So let's jump right in. Let's take a look. I'm going to highlight a few of my favorites here. I'm not going to cover the Windows XP files or even some of the files I don't use as often. I want to try to keep this scoped in and targeted on some of the most common commands I use. I do want to call out, if you see %systemroot% and you remember it from the previous video, give yourself a pat on the back. That is a system environmental variable, so it kind of shortcut links a specific file path. So let's go ahead, let's take a look at the etc hosts file here. So we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna do a dir %system root %, \, then we're gonna do system32 drivers etc hosts. And you'll see here, this is the host file. It doesn't have an extension. Don't let that freak you out or anything. I'm gonna up arrow, we're gonna go back and we're gonna change this to type. If you've used a Linux machine before, type is very similar to the cat command on a Linux machine, and it just lists out the contents of the file. Now, a high-level overview of what the etc hosts file is, it's basically a hard-coded IP and DNS name. You're gonna see a lot of administrators put hosts in here that are really important, that they want to make sure if the network goes down or is a little unstable, it will always have this domain name to IP mapping. Now you can see here, this file is not required. In this specific circumstance, I don't have any hosts mapped. There are some great examples here. Windows provides these examples automatically. So you see rhinoacme.com. So if this was active, any requests to Rhino Acme server would get automatically resolved to this IP address, even without consulting any network domain name information. But you can see there's a little hashtag here, so it is commented out. But I typically check this file just to see if there's any really important hosts that admins want to make sure this computer can access. Jumping back to the RTFM, we have a networks config file. You can type that out if you want. Config SAM, this is worth mentioning. A lot of times if you're trying to dump passwords on a Windows machine, maybe you're running a hash dump plugin on a remote access tool, it's gonna try to dump passwords out of this file. I would say directly interacting with the SAM file is probably not gonna work. There's a lot of very unique permissions Windows has on it, detections they've put in place to see if users are trying to manipulate this file. So a lot of times this file, you're gonna be accessing it indirectly by running different red team tools to dump passwords. Now that said, you may try to grab this SAM file, copy it somewhere and try to retrieve it to your own computer. That way you can tear it apart and get access to the hashes inside. Now, like I said, I'm not gonna cover Windows XP commands. Those are pretty old. If you do find a Windows XP computer, which honestly, you may find a lot of times in operations, they'll have really old computers that are running really important parts of networks that they don't want to update, they don't want to introduce any risk to those different business processes, so it's not necessarily out of the question that you would find a Windows XP computer. We have some of the different log locations, which we will be running commands that parse out these logs later in the video library, but if you've ever heard of Windows Event Viewer, Windows actually logs a lot of the different activities that happen on Windows computers, such as services created, services starting, different types of logins, right? Windows wants to log all those things so admins can go in and parse out if there's bugs or if they're trying to find if something bad happened, right? So those are the locations of those logs. So that brings us to one of my favorite file locations, the startup folder. Now the startup folder very simply executes anything inside of it on user login. So every user has their own startup folder. If it contains binaries, bash scripts, it will execute on user login. So typically, if you're looking for some type of persistence to auto run your malware, this location will come in handy. Now for this location, let's go ahead and take a peek inside of Phyllis's startup folder. If you watched our last scenario, we got a callback as Phyllis Schneider. So let's go ahead and run a dir and we'll see what's inside this one. Now for this example, I want to actually use Sliver's GUI. It'll allow us to execute various commands against that callback. So let's go ahead and create a new tab here. We'll do an ls. I can see here my Sliver GUI. I think, yeah, this was it right here. // Again, this is a development alpha version. This is not supposed to be used in operations, but luckily we're just in our lab here, so it doesn't matter too much. So let's go ahead and get this thing started here. Awesome, we got our GUI. Let's go ahead and maximize it. We'll connect into the Sliver server running on our own Kali machine here. You can see our two sessions. That shouldn't be a surprise. We'll go to sessions here at the top. We'll go into just one of the sessions, doesn't matter. And then on the left here, we have a bunch of different controls and different things we can do. We're just gonna go to command exec, and then we're gonna type in cmd.exe, whack C, and we're gonna paste in this full path from the RTFM. So you can see here, user profile. Again, if you watched our environmental variable video, you should see that this is just shorthand notation for a specific file path. I believe this one's C users, and then obviously their app data folder after that. Now there's one more thing I need to add to this before I run it on the target system. I need to make sure to wrap quotes around the whole thing. So let's go ahead and add a quote here. We'll add a quote here. And the reason for that is the start menu right here has a space. So if we don't put quotes around it, Windows is gonna think we're sending it two separate commands, which is not the case. So we'll wrap quotes. Oh, and there's one more modification. We do need to tell command prompt what we're doing. So let's throw our dir in there and let's click execute here. Boom, it executes the command on the target. So you'll see right here at this really long path, again, environmental variable kind of shorten that up a little bit, that we have one file. Now this file is off limits lab bat. So what Windows is doing is when Phyllis logs in, it's going to run this bat file. Now I want to list out the contents of this bat file. We're going to kind of go a step further here. So instead of dir, let's make this type, just like we've been typing commands out, right? And then we'll go to the very end here. We do need to tell it we want to type out the file name, off limits lab.bat. We'll click execute and boom, we have all the contents of that bat file. So if you look really closely, it looks like on startup, Phyllis is gonna auto start task manager, regedit, services MSC, and a bunch of other things here. Now, if you're looking at it, lab off limits, I actually created this script to open a bunch of different files and windows on startup. So throughout the video library, when we're going through our situational awareness section, we'll be able to go through and see all the different things that this specific user is doing. Now that's a wrap on this section. There are some other locations if you want to go dir them out on your own lab machine, check out what's in there. The RTFM does have a short description of what's contained in there. Otherwise, go ahead, click through the next video. We're going to be looking at some registry run keys.